Now then team, in this episode I have a chat with Helen Walker, who's the Chief Exec of Carers UK. Carers UK is a national charity. Its mission is to make life better for the nearly 6 million paid carers across the UK. They do that through information and advice, through innovation to improve services for carers, through facilitating peer-to-peer connection amongst carers, and they campaign with carers for policy change. So in this episode we talk about a whole bunch of things. We talk about big goals, we talk about dogs and the impact they have on wellbeing, we talk about organisational culture, we talk about being in a position that's quite visible and what happens on social media after you go on a national television show. It's not always pretty. And we talk about what being a good leader is. So grab a brew and listen to the conversation. See you in a bit. Helen, thank you so much for joining the Causes Show.
My pleasure.
Could you give me a 1-minute intro and take this as holistically as you'd like? It doesn't need to be about sort of your current role or anything. A 1-minute intro to Helen Walker.
Blimey. I guess in terms of if you look at me as an individual or as a leader, I guess my job is very important to me and has always been very important to me. But I don't really want to be that which just kind of is, that's the only thing I am or who I am. But I guess that's kind of very much a primary focus in my life. I'm single, so there's kind of just me and my dog at home. So it does have does play a big role in my life.
When has work always been that a real driver for you, or has there been a discovery that was a huge motivator?
No, I think it has always been. There's always been a very. It's always been very important to me to do well in my job, but because I've always wanted to do something where I feel I'm making a difference in the world. So that's the important bit to me. It's never been about making money. It's never been about that big kind of salary. It's about the cause. It's about making a difference. And there's compromises along the way. There's compromises with everything along the way. But it's kind of where, it's the core part of that is that I'm making a difference.
Can you give me a whistle-stop tour of your sort of career highlights and the different causes that you've worked on?
I mean, do you want to start at the very beginning?
Yeah, but let's view this one as so these are sort of two very quick fire intros. So if you could give me because we will get into the detail, but
okay,
give me a sort of top line skim of the moments in your career.
Okay, so the first would be, I started in academia, so I started sort of thinking that I might be an academic, so went straight into postgrad, realised that wasn't for me for lots of reasons which I won't go into. Became a trustee of a small charity because I wanted to break into the charity sector, and then I made compromises in terms of the cause and the job. It was kind of along the way. So I worked for a benevolent fund for the hospitality industry. A pivotal moment in my life was working for SAFA, which was a military charity, and then set myself the target of becoming a chief exec by the time I was 40, and nailed that when I was 39, and became a chief exec of a national volunteering charity, and then I got the Carers UK gig. So that's where I'm
at. Why? That's a very specific goal. Why CEO before 40?
I think because by that stage I was working in a military charity, and there are kind of very nuanced kind of set of organisations, and there's an awful lot of kind of retired generals that get parachuted into leadership roles. And I'm not dissing that, because I think if you're a general in the British Army, you know, by definition, you're a leader of people. But it's a very different leadership role. And unless you recognise that when you come into the charity sector and see it as a stepping career and see that you need to lead in a different way, then you're not necessarily a very good leader. So I saw some very good leaders and I saw some very bad leaders. And by the stage that I was kind of ready to leave SAFA, I felt that I could be a better chief executive. And so that was kind of a bit of an incentive that made me think I could do this. And I was at that stage in my life where I was kind of, you know, ambitious and I like to set myself targets. So that was why I set myself that target. I thought, right, that's what I want to do, so that's what I'm going to do. And you know, a lot of it, you know, recruitment agencies said, oh, you know, you need another big job as a fundraiser. That was my profession. You need to go into another, you know, bigger charity or a different kind of charity. You know, fundraisers aren't really chief executives, and at that stage they weren't. Now I think, you know, anyone who's recruiting a chief executive will want to see some fundraising expertise within them, but that wasn't the case when I started looking. And so it was less usual for a director of fundraising to become a chief executive. So it was a challenge, but I just kept on, you know, going to interviews.
What were the hardest parts from moving to from director of fundraising to chief exec? What were you surprised that you sort of had to learn in that first executive role?
Gosh, I think the challenges of senior leadership teams, actually, and how they work, and how there's an expectation when you walk into a role that you know stuff, which you don't. So you have to get up to speed very, very quickly. I found some of that kind of team building, some of those individuals very difficult. Then realising that you had to build relationships with the board of trustees and with a chair. I had a chair who was absolutely lovely, but incredibly busy. And I don't think I had a one-to-one meeting with him for the first 12 months. And then you kind of realise that that's not normal. But if you're a new chief executive, you don't kind of know that that's not normal. So I think the biggest learning that from there, and we were in one of those buildings that has lots of charities in it, where it was building a network of chief exec phone a friends. And I still have that, and I still proactively build that in my world now, because sometimes you can't talk to people in your own organisation. You don't want to talk to your chair or your board about those problems and issues. And so you need other people who know exactly what you're going through, who are in the same lonely leadership role, that you can phone up and say, I really need a pint, and can we just talk through this?
How would you? So you were in. I mean, I sort of want to guess the building that you're talking about, because there's a very famous one, isn't there?
Your Charity Towers.
Yeah.
That wasn't the. Oh no, which charity am I thinking of? No, that wasn't. That wasn't. I was in Charity Towers in my first role, but that wasn't. It was a similar kind of building.
For people who don't have that building where next door you can go find another senior leader, do you have any advice around how so recognizing that network is crucial? How do you go about developing it outside of just being immersed?
Yeah, I guess. Well, I mean, there are bodies, aren't there? So there's there's a KIVO, which is the Association of Chief Executive Officers of Voluntary Organisations. I've always been a member of that, and it's I probably haven't used it as much as I could do, but I kind of feel like it's somewhere that's got your back. So if you're there's loads of kind of networking things that they put on, as do NCBO actually. So there are networking places that you can go, but also there's stuff that you do in your own job you find yourself invited to, and you find a lot of my kind of friends actually through work have been, you meet kind of soulmates when you're at those events, that you find that you're talking to in the naughty corner because you also thought the speaker was rubbish, and then you kind of think, actually, this is someone that maybe I should keep in touch with.
So you mentioned you were a trustee at a charity.
Yeah.
Like, can you and that sort of kicked off the whole thing. Did that feed into being? What's the value of being a trustee in those early stages? What did that lead to?
It was a deliberate move to kind of try and understand it. So it was a very small charity, and actually we worked. It was running a school for deaf children in Tanzania, and actually I got them charitable status. So I filled out all the forms and things. I think I was the secretary on the committee, and it was through my boss at the time who knew that they were looking for trustees, and I've always volunteered, so kind of that's something that I think is quite important in my life, and I work in the voluntary sector, and I perhaps talk about that afterwards. I proactively encourage people to volunteer, to bring kind of good practice back into your organisation, and also bad, or learn what people do not so well to make sure that you don't bring that into your organisation. But for me, being so again, it was kind of meeting people. So there was another kind of young guy in there who's worked in the charity sector, and we'd go away and do like little funding applications and stuff together. So that was a learning curve. And I think it was him that sort of said to me, if you want to break into the sector, I always thought I'd be working in development because that's what I'd studied. It was just like make some compromises along the way and get your foot in the door and get some skills. And so I did. So that's why I wound up working for, benevolent fund for the hospitality industry. It was like I wanted to get a foot in the door. I always assumed that I'd wind up in development, and I certainly never have.
I mean, I'm in international development most of the time. And there'll be people on the show who are as well. What's the appeal around it? And do you think, is that something you sort of want to do at some point?
No. And I think I wouldn't get it anywhere. I mean, because I've not worked in that part of the sector. It's what I studied. So my what was originally a PhD, ultimately an MPhil, was on HIV in Kenya, specifically back in the 90s, and seeing that not as it was perceived at the time as a kind of gay man's disease, but mapping, because I was a geographer, the trucking routes through Kenya through prostitutes, that the spread of HIV were along those kind of trucking routes, and how you empower. You had to, if you were going to resolve the issue, it's about empowerment of women to a certain extent. And so kind of that was my starting point. That was where I was interested in, and so that's what I kind of assumed that I would do. But life takes you in different kind of in different ways.
Did you bring objects? So
I did.
Oh, perfect. So the next it's a repeated section of the show, but we're asking guests to bring 3 objects, or it doesn't have to be 3, but some objects that represent sort of pivotal moments in your journey, and you can take journey to mean whatever you want it to mean. So let's have the object discussion. So give us an intro to them, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, so this I've alluded to already. So this is my MPhil thesis, and I wouldn't rush to the University of London because it's really not very good. It's not very interesting, and it was, but it taught me a huge amount. So firstly, it started off as a PhD, and then I had my visa revoked to work in Kenya, partly because I was studying HIV, partly, well, I don't know, it was just one of those things. But I suppose the reason that I chose it was pivotal in that I was determined to get something from it. So having spent a year doing desk-based research and then planning to do a year out in the field, that didn't work. So I didn't want 2 years blank on my CV. I didn't want to waste it. I had a government grant from the Isle of Man, because that's where I lived. I was determined to do it. So I did it. I wrote it up as a desk-based piece of research, part-time, whilst working at the School of Orange and African Studies, in a kind of event management role. And it took me a long time and kind of 2 Vivas, and ultimately, it's something I'm very proud of, because I was just determined to get it. So kind of just a kind of relentlessness about not giving up, I suppose. But it was very painful, and it showed me that I'm not an academic, and I wanted to make a difference to people's lives in a different way. And that's not to say that academics don't make a difference to people's lives. It's just that I'm not a very good one. Research bores me. I'm not very good at it. I didn't want to spend my life teaching other people. I wanted to do something practical that I felt that I was changing, people's lives.
Can you, have you, I suppose the question I've got in my mind is, I want to delve into this grit and figure out grit in your personality, and whether it's been there the whole time, or whether there's been certain moments that have made you, relentlessly, I will get through this hard project or difficult project. Can you talk to me about your relationship with grit and getting through difficult things?
Yeah, I guess it's just I don't like to fail, and there's sort of a determination. And also, if people tell me I can't do something, then it makes me even more determined to do it, and do it kind of well and prove them wrong. And that's just part of me and who I am. But there's no doubt that experience was horrible, and it destroyed my confidence on multiple occasions. That I don't, particularly want to go into. Lots of different people involved in that, and so actually ultimately getting it proved to me that I was able to do it, and then I could draw a line and mark it up and move on, and and that's what I did.
Can I ask about something that will come up time and time again? Is moments where you've sort of had to rebuild confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to touch on that and give any advice for anybody who might have had their confidence knocked in some way, like how you went about rebuilding? Like I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I guess that you've rebuilt confidence from that to get to where you are. So can you talk about confidence building in oneself? It
happens in lots of different ways, and then you get knocked again, and then you have to rebuild. There's a number of pivotal moments in my life where I've been knocked back down to rock bottom. So I suppose that experience with the thesis was one of them. I lost my job at the benevolent fund in a very unpleasant way. That kind of knocked me, and then I rebuilt it at SAPA. So there's something, it's often that someone takes a punt on you. And I suppose in terms of my own leadership, learning from the fact that people have, in pretty much every role actually, have taken a punt on me as not the finished product that they wanted, but could see something. That as a recruiter, I would always, if I see someone who maybe isn't quite what we thought we were looking for, but there's a spark, there's an enthusiasm, there's a genuine kind of passion and belief that they can step up. I would always take a punt, because you remember the people that took a punt on you, and nobody's the finished product.
Love that. I love that. All right, object number 2. Let's get into that.
Okay, so this is just because it's Christmas time where we're recording this. This is a soldier. So this really represents SAPA, which was definitely a pivotal job for me. It's quite cute little soldier. So I was kind of pushed out of my role at the Benevolent Fund. So I was out of work for a couple of months, and I went for this job at SAPA, which was an assistant director of fundraising, just comedy gold interviews with certainly one of the directors almost certainly drunk, and a general who was kind of slightly slightly mad. And I remember after the second interview, it was I was walking across the Tower Bridge. It was November, December. There was kind of like this pea soup fog, so it felt kind of like I was in the 1800s or something. And I had an ancient mobile phone, and my mum rang me and said, how did it go? And I had this terrible cough, and I said, oh, they're all mad, Mum, and slightly drunk, and even if they offer it to me, I'm not going to, accept it. And she said, as mothers do, but you don't have a job. Good point, well made. So and then they offered me the job, and I accepted it. And it was a pivotal moment in my life. So I was the only. Well, I was promoted quite quickly, because what I didn't realise is the goal was to have a succession for a director that was retiring. And I was the only director with no military experience. I was one of two women, and I was 20 years younger than anyone else on the senior management team. So really, I had an awful lot to prove, and I think people kind of just thought, that the general in charge, he was called the controller. I mean, there wasn't even called the chief executive, and people called him that. They said, good morning, controller. Quite. And they were military, so he walked into a room, they all stood up. And I didn't do that because I wasn't military, and why would you? I guess I had a different relationship, and I think it was almost like I was some sort of weird experiment. But as a fundraiser, it's relatively easy to prove yourself, and I'm going to say this knowing that it's not easy, but you just double the income, right? And then,
sure.
People can't question you or the decision to put you in the role. So and I built a young team around me of women, and there was all sorts of issues. Long before Me Too, it was a very strange environment, but I loved it. It was also such a privileged environment. I got to go to places and meet people that I would never go to or meet. I got to do things that I learned on the job a little bit, and it was a great and at times awful experience. But I think that was probably a pivotal job for me, without a shadow of a doubt. And it gave me the ability to then subsequently, move up onwards and upwards.
I guess I'm really curious on that job in particular, around organisational culture, and it being a sort of a military, just a de facto military culture, and without having have a really good friend who's in the army and post army has been very drawn to jobs that are actually quite similar, like the fire service and the school. So with big systems where there's very obvious hierarchy and things like that. So, and I can't imagine him not being in an environment that's so structured like that. Was Safa like that, and how did you, as somebody who hadn't had military experience, how did you navigate a culture that I presume was quite tough, full of probably a lot of ego in there? Yeah,
I don't know is the honest answer. I think partly there was a level of naivety, and so I just was me, and it's been kind of bounced back to me by the general in charge. He said, but you just call me Peter, and it's like, well, that was your name, and so there was from that perspective, it wasn't a deliberate lack of respect by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that I didn't know any better. But also there was this kind of, because I was a woman, I was treated differently as well. So, I just didn't open a door for myself for 7 years, and I remember going to a bar. There's a lot of alcohol involved here. After we'd been to a pitch with two senior kind of people, one of them went to the bar, I went to the loo, and then I went to sit down. And as I went to sit down, the other guy kind of stood up, and I said, "Oh, where are we going?" Genuinely kind of thinking we were moving tables, but he was standing up because I was a woman and I was coming to the table to sit down. And you know, the sort of walking on the outside of the pavement, you know, to protect me from the horse carriages or whatever. And I don't diss that, because that was kind of who they were and how they were, and I'm not offended by that. And I know some people are. I don't find it patronising. It was just, and so you just had to get used to that different. So I think I got used to it just out of naivety, and because it was such a different environment, I just enjoyed it, and I think you also put, you know, you draw your own lines of what you will tolerate and what you won't, and you pick your battles, and just that's not acceptable, and so, you know, perhaps those lines are slightly different than they would be now, and they would be in a different environment than one where I was working, but the lines were drawn, and there were things that I wouldn't accept, but there were others that, you know, were you just kind of sucked up, and that, you know, may or may not be a good thing.
One of the
questions, very different now. I think the culture is very different now, but we are talking 20 years ago.
One of the questions that I was going to ask later, but let's ask it now, is how important do you think, so let's move past Safa, but just generally as a leader, how importantly do you view culture in an organisation in order to have the most impact that an organisation can have? What does organisational culture, like, how much of the mix does that get from you?
It's huge, and I think there's something, I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's kind of the culture of an organisation is the worst behaviour that a chief executive will tolerate, and that's quite, you know, that puts a lot of pressure on you as to where you kind of draw the line. But also, it's about values, and it's about living and breathing values. Now, I can, you know, I've got my Carers UK book right in front of me. Our values are on notebooks, you know, but they're more than 3 words, but those are that's the main kind of. We when we did our new structure, our new vision, we set up a group of staff to design our values as to how we would deliver our vision. So it was by staff, for staff, if you like, and we celebrate our values genuinely. So, you know, every month we have a values award in our staff meeting, and I think you have to try and set the culture. But you know, your job as a leader is to live and breathe it. Your job is to lead by example, and try, you know, to ensure that others see that, and that you're, you know, none of us are perfect, you know, by any stretch of the imagination. So you can only do your best in any environment, and sometimes your best isn't good enough, and sometimes, you know, people will always criticize, and that's just, you know, part and parcel of being a leader. But I think you have to lead by example. So that's all I try to do.
Amazing. Before we dive into more questions like that, let's do final object. Have you got a third?
Yeah, final object is just a picture of my dog. There you go. Because I like to bring cute pictures of my dog to everything. But she's been, just in terms of my mental and physical well-being, you know, and how I deal with my own kind of stress, has been kind of pivotal. So I didn't think I could get a dog till I retired, because I live alone and I work long hours, and I always worked, you know, 9 to 5 in the office. So she came into my life post-COVID, when it was very obvious that, you know, well, we wouldn't have been doing this in, like, you know, second bedroom, right? If you know, pre-COVID, because I'd have been in the office, and so just having having to go out for a walk, you know, every day, having that headspace when we're out every morning walking. So we're, you know, I'm at my best in the morning. So, I get up at 6, we walk for an hour, and that's my time. Nobody can have a little part of me at that moment in time. We're out walking, and that clears my head for the day, and I work through things, and I know what's going on. So, I'll talk to her about the day ahead, and who's irritating me, or whatever. And I'm sure people walking along the street as we're heading up to the forest just wonder what on earth I'm doing, ranting away to my dog. And then when I'm at home at lunchtime, we go out for 20 minutes around the village, and again after work. So that means that I don't sit at my desk, and it's very easy sort of during COVID in particular, where we were all kind of locked down, and we were so busy. I could easily just sit at my desk for 8-9 hours without moving, really, apart from to nip to the meal or grab a sandwich and just carry on. And then, at the end of the day, move to watch a slightly bigger screen that was equally depressing about COVID. So I just think having that discipline, you've got no choice but to go out and just take a break. And that has been that's had a big impact on my life and my kind of physical. If you do 20,000 steps a day, it's good for you, right?
Yeah. And you're leading by example, not only for staff in terms of taking a break, but Carers UK, a huge part of that is about taking a break as a carer as well. So it's nice that's one thing that this is a very serious question, but when I was in the office and Millie was in the office, there's an energy of having a dog in the office.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about the impact of Millie on other staff at Carers UK?
She doesn't go in often, but when she does, and funnily enough, she was in a few, not a couple of weeks ago actually, because I was being nagged because I hadn't taken her in. She does, and that's something about, there's lots of evidence, isn't there, of therapy dogs, for example, and they do, you can see people calming down. So Millie is actually a therapy dog. So that was something else. You touched earlier on volunteering. So I've always volunteered in my life, and I've often been a trustee, which I think is a good thing for a chief exec. But at the same time, when I got her, I wanted to do something that didn't take me away from her any more than I'm already away from her, which is quite a lot. So as soon as she was old enough, we qualified as a therapy dog. So and we don't do it as often as we did, but we go to our local care home, and a lot of the residents have dementia and are non-verbal, but they see Millie and they smile, and we're there for maybe 30-40 minutes, but just going around the sort of shared living space, and she just sits there with them and makes them smile, and it's not a similar thing when you take her into the office, that people will it's amazing the number of people that actually come into my office on a day when Millie's there, just because they have something they want to talk to me about, where not all of them they leave me alone. So but it's great, and I probably will take her in. We're doing, next year is our 60th anniversary, and we're doing a dog walking challenge in April, so 60 miles for 60 years. So Millie and I'll be doing that, and she was modelling the bandanas that we have. So there'll be lots of she's working out her rider and her modelling fee at the moment.
That's 60 miles in a day.
No, 60 miles in a month.
Oh, I was going to say, yes, that's an absolute mission of it.
Although we probably do about 60 miles in a week, just when I look at my Fitbit, just because that's what we do. But that's great. Yeah.
Amazing. All right, thank you for those objects. So, get into broad sort of organisational questions, and more on your journey. But I was wondering if you can recall a time that is a sort of butterfly effect. So something that might have seemed like a small thing that actually shifted your direction.
My direction in what way?
I mean, you can take it sort of however you want, but I'm thinking, was there a conversation you had? Was there something you read? Was there a meeting that you were part of that had more of an impact on the steer that you sort of implemented after that? than might have
yeah,
appeared?
I mean, subconsciously or even consciously. So I went on a course called the Windsor Leadership Trust. Whilst I was at Time Bank, which is my first chief exec job, and quite into that. So maybe sort of 7 years. I was there for 10 years, and it's probably too long. Well, it was too long. And I was invited to this course, but it was expensive, and you got a bursary if you were a charity. So my chair agreed to it, and the concept of Windsor is, so it's at St George's House on the premises of Windsor Castle. Okay, so, and it's a 5-day residential. So you basically go in with your little suitcase and you walk through these intimidating gates of Windsor Castle and think, what have I done? I'm terrified. I've got 5 days with complete strangers, and I feel, I kind of hate that. I hate that phrase, imposter syndrome, but that's kind of how you, like, that is kind of how you felt. And the whole idea is that you bring. I was on the emerging leaders course, emerging leaders from across sectors, so that you build across society relationships. So that actually, as you become leaders, you have those relationships across society, and it works. I mean, I give you an example of that happened just 2 weeks ago. But so you have, people from the church, from the military, from the police, from corporates like Rolls-Royce, from little charities like mine, from, manufacturers, farmers, and there's 25 of you split into 3 groups, and you have periods of reflection and so on and so forth. And actually you build extraordinary relationships during those 5 days, and you're staying Windsor Castle, in St George's House. And there's one day when we had a period of reflection, and I'm slightly worried about the alcohol fee here, but our little group snuck out to the pub. And when we came back into Windsor Castle, we just noticed that the Royal Standard had come up. So whilst we'd been out, the Queen had arrived, and was staying in the castle about 5 minutes walk from where we were staying, and you kind of think, wow, and that so the stuff I learned there, really, that it's no different leading in the police. You might be solving a murder, but the challenges that you have as a leader are no different to the challenges that you have if you're running a charity, because it's managing people. It's people. And how you motivate people and how you support people, during something difficult like that, is no different across the whole spectrum of leadership. And you do build relationships. So I have some very good friends that I see kind of quite regularly from that I would never know in a month of Sundays, apart from doing that course. So yeah, that was probably a pivotal moment for me.
Mm-hmm. Something you said. You said, I dislike the term imposter syndrome. Why?
Because I think a lot of women use it, and I think it's, and we all feel it. We all feel when we walk into some rooms. I remember being invited to 11 Downing Street with a meeting with the Chancellor the night before the election, and expecting it to be a room full of, loads of people, and there were 10 of us around a table, and I just thought, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? I'm representing my charity, I'm representing carers, and you can't allow yourself to feel that, even if you do in your little head. You've got. I think yes, we all feel it, and sometimes it's good to express that weakness, if you like. But at the same time, I think if you're going to kind of do your job, you have to have the confidence to believe in yourself, and not sort of So I just don't like the term. It's not that I don't feel it. I just think that it's not a good term.
You obviously, I've met a lot of carers who are impacted by the work of Carers UK. So feel free to sort of go into the Carers UK side of this question or previous organisations as well. Who have you met, somebody who is supported by the charity that you work at, who has challenged your thinking, and what's the story there?
Lots of, I mean, it's not always about challenging. I think it's about kind of, with carers, it's always shocking how much they deal with and still come out smiling sometimes. And actually, you know, an awful lot of the case studies that work with us and actually are, you know, always going to be more powerful than me as a voice representing carers and talking in the round about carers. When you have a carer who tells a politician eyeball to eyeball the reality of their life, it's always going to be much more powerful. And I've been, you know, reduced to tears on multiple occasions by some of the stories that I hear, and I claim never to cry. So, you know, so that is, you know, from a carer's perspective, that's powerful. But the flip side of that is also, you know, carers can be very vocal and very harsh. Social media, particularly, I find a difficult place to be sometimes because, you know, I and my team work incredibly hard and to the best of our ability. And I know that's not enough. And I know that sometimes we have to welcome things that government do that are, you know, in the scheme of things, infinitesimal crumbs. But it's, you know, we have to accept those and welcome those because that's the reality of what we've got. And we know that there's so much more we can do and so much more that carers deserve, and rightly so. Sometimes when you come out of a day where you've done a load of television interviews and radio interviews, which are draining and exhausting and stressful, and that you've launched reports and you've been in rooms with, and you come back and you go onto your social media and you're slammed for not doing enough or for drawing a salary because, you know, carers don't get it. I mean, carers allowance is ridiculously small. It's the lowest benefit of its type, and I'm angry with them and I'm angry for them. And I understand it, but I do find it hard, those personal attacks, because I do my best for carers. I do everything in my power to do my job to the best of my ability. And I'm sorry that that's not enough. But sometimes I find those personal attacks very difficult to handle.
What tactics do you sort of employ to deal with that?
Well, my comms team tell me not to read it, but that's very difficult to do. I think you have to step back from it and realise that people are in a very difficult place. They're hitting out at somebody that's kind of anonymous and perhaps is you know it's easy to hit out at you. And to just know that you've done your best. I mean, if you think you haven't, then okay, that's, you know, then take that, you know. But if you know you've done your best and you know that your team around you have been working themselves into the ground, and I could not be more proud to be the Chief Executive of Carers UK. We have an extraordinary staff team who work in an incredible way and deliver way above anything that you could imagine for a team that small. And so I know that we do our very best, and that's all I can do. I can't do more than that.
So one of the things I sort of asked you to think about coming into this was influencers and mentors. I want you to imagine a scenario where, you know, we're around boards of trustees a lot. If you were building a personal board of trustees, who are you putting on the board? One thing I would say is probably people who aren't at Carers UK at the moment, because just, you know, people from
like past
prior to that, yeah. Who are you putting on there and why?
That's it. Well, you know, I'm immediately going to ignore what you just said. I'd have my current chair, because I probably learned, you know, as much from him as any other influential person in my life, and he's certainly, you know, through very difficult times, not least through the COVID, through restructures, through other challenges and that every organisation goes through. I've learned a lot from him, and I have been incredibly supported by him. And the importance of the chair chief executive role only makes comes to the fore when you realize when it breaks down, and when you realise that it can break down, and that's happened to me in the past. And so I value a chair that I have a very open and honest relationship with. So I'm going to ignore you and say that the nick's going on there. There'd definitely be the first general that I worked for at SAFA, although very sadly he passed away. But he, again, he took a punt on me, and I think, and again, I learned stuff from. So he did take it as a second career. He always said, it took me 3 years to get the army out of my system, and then I, and was very proud of what he achieved in the charity sector, as opposed to just being something else. So I think. So I learned much from him. He sort of was a mentor to me through many things, and also took pride in seeing me do well. And that was special. I think other people that had an influence in my life. There was the first chief executive in the sector was a young woman who gave me a chance when I didn't really know anything about fundraising, and that's kind of quite pivotal and quite important. I think in time I've had 3 different chairs, all who had different skill sets, who offered me different things, who valued me in a different way, and who I were very, very couldn't be more different as individuals, and I learned different things from along the way. And I think and I think you never stop learning, and I think when you think that you can stop learning, it's time to stop and give up, because you learn from people up and down every single day.
So a very intentionally ambiguous question: what's good leadership to you?
Open and honest, transparency, without a shadow of doubt. I've always tried to be that. I remember when I was working at a university, I was a union rep, and so represented people. So I sat in meetings where the senior management team just lied through. I mean, I'd been in the meeting the week before and I'd heard what they'd said, and I swore to myself then that however hard the message was, I'd never lie to people. I'd always tell them the truth, or if I couldn't tell them the truth for whatever reason, that I would tell them, I can't tell you that. That really has stuck with me. Honesty and openness is something that I think is really important. Leading by example, I think kind of flexibility, cutting people some slack, and letting them be their own, people, and doing their own kind of, trusting people to do their job.
How does empathy feed into your your sort of personal leadership equation?
I think if you work in a charity, you have to be empathetic with your beneficiaries, if you like. I don't really like that phrase for what we do, but you have to have an understanding and empathy for the cause, and the cause is central. I mean, when I got this job, it was like I knew what the job was because I was the chief executive already. It had to be the cause. That the cause had to be the motivating factor for this role. So, and I think if you're the person that stands on the podium and speaks, or goes in front of a funder and speaks, you have to have an empathy for your cause. You have to have an understanding, but also that transpires into your staff. You have to know what's going on in their lives and recognise. And we have a lot of people who care as well. Not surprisingly, and work for our organisation. You know that people are dealing with an awful lot at home as well, and you have to recognise that sometimes when they're not performing, or they speak in a way that they don't normally speak, that actually it may not be something that you're talking to them about. It may be something else that's happening elsewhere in their lives. And I think that's one of the things that's quite difficult with this hybrid world in which we live. When we were in the office, you kind of knew, you bumped into people in the kitchen, you knew what was going on in their lives. It's much harder now. I see people less. I was in the office yesterday, and, you know, a lot of the time when I'm physically there, it's about walking the floor and just talking to people. Obviously finding what chocolates floating around the office. That's always a good bonus. But you know, just chatting to people is as much my leadership role when I'm physically in the office as doing my job. Because that is part of my job, knowing my staff and supporting them, and them knowing that I'm not this weird chief exec that just sits in an office all day and doesn't talk to people is really important.
Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to see the we're only going to get more hybrid. That I don't. I think the sort of cat's out the bag kind of thing in terms of hybrid. So if there's less opportunities to have those sort of walk around moments, have a bit of chocolate with somebody, what is your thinking? How do you apply that to a more and more of a hybrid world?
I mean, I think we've learned, you know, we've learned a lot through COVID. And I actually, you know, I've been at Carers UK 6 years this week, and I don't count 2 years of those because they were the COVID years, and that's not part of my kind of leadership. And we all learned a lot about ourselves during that time. We all learned a lot about how to lead in a very different environment. We all learned an awful lot about firefighting. And now we're still learning about what the new world looks like. We've been very flexible because, again, a lot of people care. And so that flexibility works for them as well. I just think we have to work harder and more intensely and you know, focus on our values and focus what works for people in order for them to do their jobs to the best of their ability. And that may be 5 days a week at home. It may be 5 days a week in the office. But for us, you know, we have 3 days now. We don't open the office on Mondays and Fridays because people didn't go into the office on Mondays and Fridays. That means more intensely that you get people there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So when you do go in, there's people there and you can interact as teams. And I think you just have to work with what you've got. We're not going back. I will never work 5 days a week in an office again. You know, that's that. You know, if I move from this role, that will be part of my criteria. I won't do that because from my perspective, in terms of my own work-life balance, one, I do a lot when I'm at home, but it means that I have a better life than I did before COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're in the rapid round. So we've got rapid fire questions just to wrap up. What's the other charity that you look up to the most?
Oh gosh, that's a very difficult question. I don't think I can answer that. I think there's so many organisations out there that do such incredible work that you can learn from. That I can't answer that. There's charities that I support. There's charities that I you know, aspire to lead. But too big a question. Not going to answer that.
No worries. Most misunderstood aspect of the sector.
That it's led by volunteers. You know, that you people, you know, if you're running a multi-million-pound business, you have to pay a leader to do that. It's a tough job. It's a really hard job. So I think that I think that's a big misunderstanding. And yeah, there are a huge number, hundreds of thousands of charities that are volunteer-led and are very small, and I get that. But the reality of running an organisation our size and bigger is that you need to pay a salary that recognises what we do.
So you've got an opportunity. Somehow a phone network has come to you and said, Helen, in your personal capacity, we're going to let you send a text to every charity professional in the world. What's the text saying?
You're doing an amazing job. I mean, charities are our society in many different ways. Lots of charities are going through a really, really extraordinarily tough time right now. And I think we need to remember that what we're doing is incredible. And we are, changing, we can change the world one life at a time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this conversation. That's
Okay.
really enjoyable. Is there anything you want to sort of anything you want to say before we finish?
I don't think so. I mean, thank you for having me. It feels quite indulgent talking about yourself for an hour. No one's really ever that interested. So it's quite interesting because it makes you think about what has formed you as a leader and those kind of pivotal moments in your life.
The point of this is to speak to people like you, and I think that you can learn a lot as a sort of a listener or a viewer through somebody's story. So there are lessons in there through your own narrative. So I think it's not indulgent to have this conversation because there's lots that people can pick up on. Thank you very much.
Not at all.